Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome all of you to legislative oversight hearing about Baltimore Police District stations, relocations, and renovations. The purpose of this oversight hearing is just in informational purposes. We thank the administration for putting forth budget priorities to the governor for next year. Included in that is something that we all know is a priority, and that is to make sure that our police stations, a lot of them need to be renovated, a lot of them need to be relocated, and so what we're looking to hear now in this hearing is really just to go police station by police station to get the oversight, understand what needs to be done district by district, so that we have a better understanding of which way we're going to be proceeding. I would like to thank Director Nagiaga from DGS. I usually call you Chi-Chi, so it's hard to pronounce the last name. Commissioner Harrison, Deputy Commissioner Gillis, Rachel Zinn from Budget, Matt Stegman, Nina Thimulis, and Sonny Schnitzer from the Mayor's Office. My colleagues, to my right, Councilman Costello, to my left, Vice Chair of the Committee,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
To his left, Councilwoman McCray and Councilman Cohn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
First, I would like to invite DGS to come and present. Thank you. Take it away.
Ready? All right. Thank you for the opportunity to be here to help lay the framework to explain all the needs of the police department in the facilities that they occupy. Before I get into the details, district by district, on what the needs are, I'd like to just help explain what role it is that DGS plays in all of this. So DGS is essentially a support agency. Our mission is to support the city agencies by providing them safe places to work and efficient vehicles with which to provide the services to the citizens of Baltimore. So what we do is we partner with agencies such as the police department in this instance to assess, prioritize, and then ultimately execute anything that needs to be done with the facilities that they use. Nothing we do, no decision we make is made in a silo. We partner with the agencies, we find out what their needs are, and we make sure that all factors are taken into consideration. So cost, scope of work, feasibility, but most of all the operations of the agencies that we are trying to support. So we won't build a facility or go in and make a renovation without first finding out what the needs are, the operational needs, in collaboration with our partners. Also, as we start talking about the funding, I just want to make note that we often get requests for what some people might consider renovations, but are actually just aesthetic changes to their facilities. Those are Plan B. For us, our priority is maintaining the life safety of the occupants of those buildings and the structural integrity of them. So that is the role that we play. The services that we offer to the police department fall within two categories. We are either doing capital repairs or capital infrastructure work on the buildings, and that generally falls within the category of anything that will cost over $50,000 or whose scope of work may require something like structural engineering work. The second part of what we do is it comes out of our operating budget, and that's the general day-to-day maintenance of those facilities. I'm going to foresee a question that may come up about why it is that we continue to spend money in these buildings, knowing that there is still work being done on a strategic plan on what to do with each of the districts. And that is because we still need to be cognizant of the fact that whether or not it is the police department occupying them, whether it's now or in 5 years, those buildings are still going to be city buildings, and we can't just let them fall apart by not replacing the roof and then leading to leaking into the structure of the building. So we have a responsibility to maintain those buildings regardless of who is occupying them. And then I will now go into the specifics, if you wish, of each of the districts' recent work conducted and what we know is needed in each of them.
Sure. So if we can jump to discussing as far as the plan that was outlined to the governor. So In the packet, we have just a list of each of the 9 districts, which ones are called for relocation versus renovations, and really how we get to that. And I guess if you can explain it in a scope, I guess the first piece that if you can go in each one of them to explain is obviously we know redistricting has passed on a state level, so the police department will be redistricting the districts after the 2020 census is complete. And so how do we know, if you can just each one when you go, can you explain how we would know which ones need to be relocated, which ones we know can be renovated, and how we can ensure that once these things are done, or once this plan in the letter, it explains that the plan should be or may be complete by the end of this year, that's prior to the census being done, how do we ensure that these districts that get relocated still end up in the same district that they are they're representing?
So we can't speak to the redistricting. Like you said, we have to wait for the 2020 census data to come out, and ultimately the decision lies with the police department where they want to place their facilities within the neighborhoods and the districts. So we were blind to that. The numbers that you see in front of you are based solely on the benchmark used by the work done in the Western District that was completed last year, and that was about $4 million to do a pretty intensive renovation of that facility. And so that's the benchmark that was used for any of our renovation numbers that you see in the information that was sent to the governor. The dollars on there for repairs or renovations are for, and I'm sorry, I misspoke, 4 million for relocation. The numbers that you see there for renovation and repairs are based on what we anticipate, based on historical and what we know the needs are of each of the facilities, in order to come up with those numbers. And we can get into details on what it is that we know is needed, based both on assessments that have been conducted and then also the expertise of the individuals that work in general services on these buildings.
All right, so you want to go one by one, and then we'll...
Can I just say something generally about the...
You can come up to the, come up to the mic.
Hi, Matt Stegman, Mayor's Office of Government Relations. Just wanted to give a sort of a little bit of context for the letter to the governor. Whether a proposed project is listed as a relocation, renovation, or repair, is based on some of the assessments that DGS has done and that they'll talk about. But the purpose of the document was not to announce a specific plan for any of these stations. Obviously, as money becomes available, as DGS and the police department work on identifying and drilling down into the needs of each of these individual stations, there's a process that they'll go through. But we wanted to get some estimates that we could present to the governor based on our experience with the renovation of the Western District of what it might look like to do a full capital improvement plan.
All right, so are you saying that in the 4 cases where they're relocation, are you saying that it's possible that those only end up getting renovated at the end of the day?
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
then in the one case where it says about a complete renovation, which is more than a relocation, is that also, are you saying that that is also up in the air?
There's a process that it will go through.
Okay, so none of this is set in stone.
Absolutely, correct.
So when it says proposed type of project, really you're saying it should say relocation / renovation.
Yeah, I mean, that's a guess based on sort of the current condition of the facility, and all of this will be, again, subject to the availability of funds and, what the process for each of these stations
Gotcha.
yields as the best result.
Gotcha. Okay,
Yep, thank you.
thank you.
You want me to go district by district,
Sure.
or how do you want?
I'd like to recognize Council President Scott for joining us, and Councilwoman Sneed also for joining us. Council President, do you have any thing you want to start with? Okay. Yeah, so go ahead. If you can start with the Central District. It's located here as proposed type of project is relocation, which now we'll add in / possible renovation. Can you talk about the Central District?
Absolutely. So part of the reason why it generally tends to fall within the category of relocation and that trumps renovation is because of the geography of where it is. It's on a busy street. There's not enough parking for the officers. For shift change, it's just not an ideal location for that district, which is why it tends to fall within the category of relocation. So work that has recently been done on it, this is headquarters.
Do you have a copy of the assessments for the committee of each of the
I
districts?
only have a copy of the Northern Parkway assessment.
Get those we can provide those for you. City Clerk has those. He wasn't able to be here.
Yeah, so if we can get that, I mean, that was the key thing we did request for tonight, was to just have the assessments of each of them. But we'll hear your presentation on each one.
Our apologies, it was a mix-up in what got printed. So even without a full relocation, the cost to bring that building back to fully functional, safe, efficient use would be about $625,000, and that's mostly based on the HVAC and some improvements to the front of the building.
Okay. So that's the big thing for the central.
Correct.
So, okay.
Sorry, just a clarifying question. So, you mentioned sort of a key point that these buildings will remain, so continued investment is necessary. Can you speak a little bit about that? So I'm guessing there's a surplus process that would go into this moving forward. So I'm a little bit confused. So is the intention that there'll be 9, well, I don't know how many ultimately end up being relocated, but whatever number, five identified as potential relocations. Is there conversation already being had about what other alternate potential uses there are? Because potentially it could make more sense to not put anything there and to demo it or get rid of. I mean, can you talk a little bit about that?
So there's nothing that has been firmed up on what the secondary use of these buildings could be, but there are options on the table. Central District could be used. There's some of the things that have been thrown out there. I don't know how current this still is, but Officer Health and Wellness Center and some other support functions. In the districts, it is a little harder to think of a secondary use, but then we also have to consider the extreme cost of demolition. So these buildings are in what we call our internal service fund, so DGS will need to find, ideally we'd be able to find another customer agency to put in there as a tenant and continue using them as city space if we can bring them up to standard. So we're weighing the cost between renovating them up to proper standards and the cost of demolition or surplusing those buildings.
Gotcha. Okay, so for the Central District, just to recap before we move on to the Eastern, the reason it's proposed here to relocate, it needs a $625,000 HVAC.
Oh, no, sorry. That was part of the 625.
Okay.
These numbers from June show HVAC and plumbing would be about $250 million. 250,000.
Okay, so $625,000 is what's at play to bring up the Central District.
At minimum, yes.
Okay, and let's move on to the Eastern.
And that's not to speak of the idealness of the location.
Sure.
That's just to fix it.
Facility standpoint, we'll take up the public safety with the police department, I guess.
Okay. So for the Eastern, just to highlight a few reasons why I ended up on the relocation budget, it also boils down to it being smack dab in the middle of a neighborhood. Very limited parking for the officers and for the operations of the district. It also requires a lot of maintenance and repairs, and I can get into those specifics. So knowing that there is ultimately going to be a plan for it, some of the recent improvements to that particular district are first floor bathrooms, patrol area floors, renovated the front lobby as we've done with a lot of the districts, and making sure that the front doors are accessible to the public, new fencing and slating, and a new intel room. So that facility has had a significant amount of work done in it.
In the Eastern District?
Correct.
So why is it on the relocation list?
It's just not ideal, from my understanding. I'm not going to speak on their behalf. That's my understanding, that its location geographically is not ideal.
Gotcha. And do you have just a rough estimate of how much was invested in there with those things you just listed?
I do not, but I can follow up with that.
Okay.
And I'll do the same with all the others. So I just have highlights of some of the recent improvements, but we can follow up with the cost.
Gotcha, okay. All right,
Southeastern?
Southeastern?
Okay, so Southeastern requires a bit less work. There's been quite a lot of work that has already gone into it, including state-of-the-art gym, and some of this has been through donor funds in addition to city funding. The roof has recently been redone, which was a significant cost. The locker rooms, the bathrooms, a lot of plumbing and drainage work, the front entrance like all the others, and some HVAC work. So again, a lot of money has been put into that one, essentially taking it off the relocation list.
Gotcha, okay, and that makes sense. Councilman Cohn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Gigi, Director, for your work. So in terms of the Southeast, there's some renovation money coming into Patterson High School, as well as the neighborhood around there from 21st Century Schools, the Inspire Grant. Would love for you, for Commissioner Harrison, to really think about how these pots of money can be connected. If it's a $1.5 million need, which I can't say whether that's right or wrong, just think about how we can leverage up new dollars that are coming into the community and how we can connect what's happening at Patterson with getting a whole new building, some additional money that's going into community renovations with whatever we need for the police station. Would love to see sort of an integrated approach so that all parties are connected.
Absolutely, will do.
Nice.
Make the best use of all the funds that are available.
Exactly.
Okay,
Be strategic about it.
absolutely.
Nice.
Any other questions about the Southeastern? Okay, the Southern?
What's the Southwest? Okay, so Southern is also slated for significant repairs and renovations. So some of the information that you had requested, Councilman Schleifer, was the assessments. And so I think I should point out some of the scores on the assessments that we do, the VFA scores. And for the Southern District, let's see that one here. Huh, for some reason that one's missing. That's the one I wanted to point out. My apologies. We'll get those to you. But some of the recent renovations that have been done include electrical, plumbing, HVAC, some cosmetic, and again, work to the front of the buildings. So you'll see a general trend here is we've been patching these buildings, making sure that the HVAC is running, that there's heat in the winter, that that the life safety of the officers and occupants of those buildings is what's critical, and that's what we address first. So, yeah.
Yeah, so
that's some of the
those
work
two
that's been done.
buildings, so the Southeast and the Southern are only calling for 1.5 million because they're pretty much up to date, just need some other improvements.
Correct.
Okay. I guess let's move on to the Southwestern that's slated for relocation.
Okay. So much like the first two that I highlighted why it's slated for relocation, it also boils down to location, in addition to a need for a full replacement of the roof. And a roof replacement generally runs about $600,000.
Okay.
Some work that has recently been done to the Southwestern includes much of the same. So renovated the admin area, redid the first floor bathrooms, the front entrance, CCTV and access control. They have a full ballistic glass in the front room now, making it more accessible to the public. Again, opened up the front doors and made it ADA accessible by installation of a ramp.
And that's for the Southwestern?
That was the Southwestern,
Okay.
right?
And when were those renovations made?
Those renovations were completed last year, I believe. Last year,
Okay, so that's also
very recent.
slated for relocation after all those renovations?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. Anybody have any questions about the Southwestern?
Thank you for the renovations. I mean, it still needs a lot of work, but
They all do, unfortunately.
yeah. I mean, I know we can keep moving, but
Okay. All right, Western.
Western is a good story to tell, only because it has had the most work done to it recently. And so that one would only, the focus on that would be just maintaining the current condition of that building by not turning a blind eye to the ongoing preventative maintenance activities that need to happen, which is why it has the lowest dollar amount on it.
Gotcha. Okay. I'd like to recognize my colleague, Councilman Pinkett, who just joined us. Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, so we'll move on to the Northwestern District that's slated for a complete renovation and the most expensive line item at $5 million.
Yes, it is. Let's see. So yes, so that a wholesome renovation is what is being called for. It is in some of the worst condition of the district. We have
Of the nine, where would you rank the Northwest?
May I? Are you asking from a facility?
From a facility standpoint, yeah.
The Northwest. Yeah, absolutely. Central is most definitely the worst. Northwest ties for second after Central.
So the Central's in the worst condition, and that one's being relocated. And number two, that's in the second worst condition, the Northwestern, and that one's called for a complete renovation.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
Again,
So,
because it's not just about the cost of renovation, but all the other factors about geography and.
all right. So let's go through
optimal
some
use.
of that. I'd like to, before we do that, recognize Council Vice President Middleton for joining us, and City Solicitor Judge Davis for joining us as well. If you can continue on the Northwest.
Okay. Some recent improvements to that have been access control to the building, making it ADA accessible, renovation of some of the specialty unit spaces. So DDU also renovated the holding cells and the entire second floor. So it's had good work, but still needs a lot more. It's still not in good condition, and these assessments are recent assessments.
Are we talking about the Northwest?
Yes, sir, we are.
Okay. So you said they did something with the holding cell, and they made it ADA compliant.
Correct.
and they
Installation of a ramp.
fixed the DDU room.
Correct.
When was that done?
Last year? Last year, sir.
Last year or yesterday?
Last year.
Last year, okay, because I was there a few days ago, I didn't see that. Okay, so, and what about the site location makes it for a complete renovation as opposed to a relocation? Because with some of the other ones that are relocating, the ones that actually got a lot of investment that you mentioned, that have had a lot of money poured into it, that are still slated for relocation, you mentioned certain site constraints like parking and other access points. And so what about the Northwest would have it as completely renovated instead of being relocated, when that clearly has the same constraints that the other districts you named have?
I would have to ask the police department to weigh in on operational reasons for it remaining in that neighborhood.
Okay, so
I don't have that information on me.
Okay.
I do want to point out that currently there is work being done on the roofs and the bathrooms.
Okay. We'll move on to the Northern.
Okay. So Northern appears to be in decent condition as well. We've put some of the recent investments and improvements have been to the front desk, installing ballistic window film, flooring replacement throughout, and renovations to some of the spaces, shift commander and the sergeant spaces.
In that space, you guys did an excellent job.
Thank you, sir.
When I was there last week, those windows and everything was done very nicely, so thank you for that. Northeastern, which is also slated for a relocation.
Yes, sir. Okay, so this one sits in the center of the Morgan State campus. It is, how old is this building? So all the buildings are on average about 50, 60 years old, so these are not new facilities that we're talking about. Some recent improvements have been to the first floor bathrooms, currently doing roof work, I believe, or will be slated to, okay, so just started roof repairs on that facility, access control, and some repairs to the rear lot infrastructure. I believe it was a wall that was collapsing, or some wall support was done on the rear lot.
Gotcha. Anybody have any questions about the Northeastern? Okay, thank you very much, and we'll turn it over to the police department.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, other honorable members of the council. Thank you for the opportunity to come before you today. I'm certainly grateful the City Council is interested in learning more about this issue, and as committed as I am and as we are to ensuring that we have police district stations that are clean, that are modern, that demonstrate our joint commitment to supporting the members of this department who risk their lives every day to keep the residents and visitors safe. Working conditions represent the #1 reason why officers either leave and or stay in a police agency, especially before they're retirement eligible. So our district stations also need to be inviting places so that our residents feel comfortable going to those stations to report crimes, to hold community meetings, and to interact with our officers. And as you all likely know, the Western District, as was mentioned, was renovated just a short while ago. And what you see there is now a station that has the dedicated space for a community. It is brightly lit, it is clean, it provides a quality space for the officers to work in. It was transformed from a place that was intimidating, ugly, and dirty to something everyone can be proud of and that our officers can feel good going to every day. I believe very strongly that every officer and every resident in Baltimore deserves to have the same experience at every one of our police stations. At this time, my team and I will be available to answer any questions, and our partners at DGS certainly have given you an update on all of the police stations, but you know, as you need, we can provide more information. But I want to just say thank you for having interest in the well-being of all of our city facilities.
Right. And thank you, Commissioner, for being here, and thank you for bringing your team with you. And again, thank you to the administration for making this a priority in this budget cycle leading up to it, because we certainly know that these districts are in disrepair. If you can sort of pick up where the director of DGS had left off as far as from a police standpoint, we know that 4 districts, the southeast, the southern, are in pretty good shape. They just need some improvements. We know the western and the northern are in the 2 best shapes, and so they just need maintenance. So in looking at the other 5 locations, have you guys had an opportunity to do a site analysis of each of those as far as safety? First and foremost, safety of the officers, and then as well as safety of the community coming to those locations?
We have been to all of them multiple times, and we have done analysis on what needs to be there, certainly compared to the most recently renovated Western. What I can tell you is the ones that are generally, not specifically, but generally on the table for relocation, it's about accessibility to the officers, accessibility to the community. How it is in a neighborhood or not in a neighborhood on a main thoroughfare where citizens can actually get there should they not have their own transportation. How can the officers have ingress and egress into and out of there to get to the calls for service that they need in a timely way? And so it really is about the accessibility of the men and women who have to do the work and the accessibility of the community members that have to get there. Some of them are not on bus routes, and some of them are really kind of out of the way. And I think that has more to do with it than anything else. But that's generally, there could be other specific reasons that in the analysis they were slated for relocation. Generally, that's the answer.
So you're saying it's the visibility and the accessibility for the public as well as the officers for those stations?
Unless it is to the point where it has outlived its life and it is not fixable, which I'm not the expert in construction, unless it has outlived its life and is at the end of life, and not much could be done with it, and or it poses some level of danger, do we add it to the list for relocation? That's specific. Generally, it is about the accessibility.
Okay, so, and I agree 100% with you on that. And so that's why within the 5 stations that are in play, meaning the ones that are either being relocated for or the one that that's listed here as a complete renovation. The one I'm the most familiar with, obviously, that's in my district, is the Northwest. And so the Northwest, all the criteria that was listed, certainly as far as accessibility, both for the public as well as the officers, has a lot of site constraints. The officers all the time on a daily basis have to park in front of people's homes in the immediate neighborhood. Whenever we have a community meeting there, whether it be a CRC meeting or, they've been gracious enough to host a lot of the community meetings there. You have community members who have to pull into the lot which says police officer only, and they're forced to park there and take up spots from the officers. As far as the public is concerned, there's really no way there's no parking for the public to actually access that station. In addition to that, there's been recent incidents, and certainly many over the years. Recently, there's been incidents where things have been shoved in tailpipes of police officers' cars. There's been reports of tires being slashed and other such incidents. And so, also on my aspect from my staff, we also receive calls from, residents who live right there. They're concerned about the constant 24/7 doors closing, the regular beeping of the horn just from locking cars' doors, because it is a 24/7 operation. And then the other thing you mentioned about accessibility and visibility, if you didn't know the Northwest District was where it was, it's set back and you can't really notice it. And thankfully, DGS, I believe it was, put in new lighting a couple years back, or maybe last year. That helped light it up. But certainly all the constraints that were listed in all of the police stations that are being relocated are certainly case in point in the Northwest. So I guess my question would be, what is it about the Northwest that we would spend $5 million, which I'm gracious to have more money than any other district coming towards the district that's in my district, but I'm just curious why that location would get a complete renovation as opposed to being listed here as a possible relocation as well.
I don't have that answer specifically. I think we can do further analysis on all of them, but I know that there are several that are in the very same position. They are out of the routine course and travel paths for community members, especially those who don't have privately owned transportation. Some of them are in conditions that are in constant need of repair with the HVAC systems, with the roofs, with the plumbing. But it is, by and large, the accessibility in many times where some are slated for renovations, and so relocation, rather. So I don't have that answer specifically why that one over any other one. I can tell you that Central is far worse than that, but it's certainly slated for relocation as well, and
Right.
it's exponentially worse than that one.
Gotcha. So as far as the plan that you guys are developing, what can we expect that to look like? Is that going to have specific locations identified? Is that going to be open-ended with possible locations? So I assume, and based on what Matt from the mayor's office said, that it's all pretty much open, which is great to hear, so that you can go to the site specific on that. But is your plan that this letter mentions that's going to come in December about the locations, is it going to look different than this, and is it going to have specific locations pinpointed? Or is it going to be more just different options for relocations?
I'm thinking it will be more of the latters, generally the options that could be on the table.
Gotcha. And will your department be making those decisions prior to the census and the redistricting being finalized?
Well, I think the census and the redistricting really depends on, there's good data that has to come from the census, but even that can't determine where stations should be. Redistricting cannot depend on that. There is a staffing plan that is forthcoming that will be here in the very near future, and that staffing plan will determine the right size of the department based on a number of goals that we set for ourselves. And so as we look at the appropriate staffing for our agency, how many officers should be assigned to a district, how many officers should be assigned to a platoon working at any given time, that's how we can determine, based on calls for service, crimes that are being reported, response times, call wait times, call deployment times, distance travel between call to call, distance travel from the station to the first call. All of those variables come into play to determine the size, the manpower structure of a district, which could ultimately, with census data, ultimately inform us about where a station could or should be.
Right. So, and I appreciate that. So I guess the overlying question here is, how do we ensure that if these decisions are made prior to the redistricting, how do we make sure that the physical districts actually remain in the districts that they serve? And obviously, I mean, just in looking at the map across between the southwest, the western, the central, and the eastern, and the southern, I mean, within redistricting, obviously, we know the northeast is the largest, and so some districts are going to expand, some are going to contract. And so how do we ensure that the central district station remains in the central district if that decision is made prior or in one of the other situations?
Well, I think we have to take all of that into account because redistricting can actually move boundary lines, and if it moves a boundary line, there is no way to keep a actual physical structure in the district because it then would be in a different district. And so that's why we have to talk about keeping the options on the table because the staffing plan will inform us about how many people should be in a district, how many people should be working at any given time, but then census data along with that in time could change boundary lines, and those buildings would then be in different districts. So I think keeping the options on the table and not necessarily defining that prematurely is where we have to be.
Gotcha. Council President?
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you, Director Nash. Thank you, Matt, for everybody, Director Martin, for being here to talk about this before we move on to talk about crime, which I'm very anxious to talk about. Mr. Commissioner, you and I have talked about this issue and talked about the conditions of the stations, which have long ago run their course and being up to standard for anyone to be working in consistently. And for this is really for Matt, and I think, Mr. Commissioner, what we have to do is get everyone to the table to understand what we have to achieve. I think what the chairman is trying to say is that oftentimes in city government, this has nothing to do with you because you haven't been there that long. We spend the same dollar twice, right? So if we are going to be moving police districts and renovating them, which we absolutely positively have to do. We know that all of our public facilities, from fire stations, police stations, and we know our public schools all need to be renovated and changed. We have to make sure that we do that in the most efficient and effective manner. And as you know, the actual law for police redistricting considers population, but it considers the things that you and I think are actually very important when talking about how the resources be given out, calls for service, violent crime, property crime, the amount of time it takes for them to get there. And my worry is that if we don't bring everyone to the table, Matt, beforehand, that we will make mistakes. And we have to make the honest decision if we get this money from the governor, which we all know is a big if when dealing with him, we have to make sure that we're doing this the right way, because the redistricting plan has to be approved by both the mayor and the council. And the mayor and the council at that time in the near future are going to look like fools if we made a decision to relocate a district and then the redistricting plan says that that district is now in another boundary line. So we have to make sure that we're all at the table to make sure that we should do this one time and do it right. The staffing plan that the commissioner has underway is going to play a critical part into making sure that we're getting the resources the way they should be, but we also have to follow the law, and we have to wait. The law is now in effect, but we have to wait until we have the data that the law requires. And some of the data is the same data that he's going to have in his plan, but the population data and other things have to be in place before we make final decisions about moving and building so that we're not wasting taxpayers' dollars.
Thank you. Anybody have any other questions? All right, so we need to take a 5-minute recess so they can set up the cameras before the next hearing. Thank you.
Yeah.